Welcome, everybody. This afternoon, we will be hearing from David Salkever, who will be telling us about 2022 elections report and a look ahead. So David is, I think, well known to just about everybody here, but just to remind you, he had a 47-year career as a professor and researcher focusing on economic issues in health, healthcare, and health policy. He completed his PhD in economics at Harvard in 1970. And then he had 2 years in the commissioned corps of the U.S. Public Health Service. He moved to Baltimore in 1972 to begin a 33-year faculty career at Johns Hopkins in the schools of public health and arts and sciences. After he retired from that, he then assumed a post as a professor in the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. He retired in 2019 when they came here to Newbridge. And David, we're looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, you know, it occurred to me as I was walking over a few minutes before, coming in to set up for the presentation today, that one of the things I want to talk about just a little bit at the very end is just some comments about possible things that might be going on in terms of volunteer efforts in 2024. And walking past the open door to the synagogue, I wondered whether our best preparation for 2024 was in here or over there. We will see. We will see. Anyway, so what I want to talk about today is focusing in particular on the experience of some volunteer efforts that I and other folks at Newbridge engaged in the 2022 election cycle, particularly focusing on two organizations that we worked with, Working America and Swing Blue Alliance. And what I'm going to cover is, first of all, I want to, before getting into saying anything about whether or not these campaigns had any particular effect or were in any sense successful, how does one look at that whole question of was a campaign successful? Then talk some about what we in fact accomplished in the 2022 campaigns that we were involved in, and conclude with just mentioning briefly what I know is going on for 2023, actually just starting up now, but also what's ahead for 2024. And I will try to remember, even though I'm looking down at my computer, to occasionally look up to see if anybody has a question. So if you raise your hand, please be a bit patient if I happen to miss you for a few seconds here. Okay, now I just have to, let's see here. Okay. Now, some of you may have gotten emails or other sorts of literature that you see from organizations that are either looking for donors to help out in election-related campaigns, or who are looking for volunteers. And I'm fortunate enough to get numbers of both of these things. And when you get these emails, either there'll be some description in the emails and the accomplishments of these organizations, or they may have attached some reports that report on what they in fact accomplished. So I thought it would be helpful just to start out quickly by taking note of what we see as the kinds of the ways in which some of these organizations have proclaimed their success. And I confess here I'm going to be a little bit cynical because I found that often you have to look pretty closely before you get a really good sense of what's being accomplished. These quotes, all three of these quotes come from actual, large, electoral organizations. First, this quote about mobilizing 3.8 million voters across 17 states. Well, what does that mean? It turns out mobilizing here means that's how many letters and cards we sent out, which is an interesting way to define mobilize. Secondly, comments about how much we increased turnout by. And typically, the effects of these volunteer campaigns is not going to be huge. It's very rare to find effects as large as 5-6% or even a bit more. Much more common to find results in the 1 to 2% range. So when an organization does in fact find that they've had that kind of impact and they report it as 0.9 percentage points, then they let us know that this is a huge success, a stunning result, which it's nice, but it's not unheard of. Finally, some organizations will be conducting campaigns in multiple areas, and in some places, like different states, they will be quite successful. In other states, they won't be so successful. And so they'll report things like, well, we increased turnout by as much as 1.2 percentage points. So that's the max. We know that's their most successful intervention. And in fact, some of them were, all of them, others were probably lower than that, and some were quite a bit lower. So just going by whatever we get in emails, whatever we get in the general literature that gets sent to us on these organizations, to my mind, is really not sufficient to give us any strong feeling that getting involved and helping out with a particular organization actually makes sense. So how do we in fact look at what could be accomplished by these kinds of volunteer organizations? And you can see there are two different kinds of measures that are most frequently looked at. The most frequent one is voter turnout. Did we in fact get more people to vote? And you'll see that's partly because in many cases we don't really know how people voted. It's just that we can't find out that they voted. The other kind of measure, which I think is probably more important, but much harder to capture, is what's sometimes called net vote or vote share impact. Did the campaign that we were involved in increase the fraction of votes going to the candidate that we wanted to support, for example, or the outcome that we wanted to support? And these are, by the way, we're not talking just about elections for candidates. It would also include referenda, such as ballot referenda on whether or not a state constitution should be modified to alter the extent of reproductive rights for reproductive care, and that sort of thing. So there are lots of different contexts where these same sorts of measures can be used. As I say, net vote impact is really more important because that's going to relate more closely to the outcomes that we're concerned about, but it turns out it's going to be a lot harder to measure. Okay, and let me just say a few words about when these two different measures come close and when they don't. Suppose that we have a report that the turnout of a campaign, as a result of a campaign, the turnout impact is 0.9%. So 0.9% of the people who were reached out to by this campaign actually voted, when in fact, if the campaign had not been in place, they would not have voted. Now, the issue is, did those 9% all vote for the side of the election or the referendum that we felt was the ones we were supporting? And it could be that they all did, although clearly that would be not what you would expect is going to happen very frequently. An alternative would be, suppose only half of those 0.9% voted in the direction that we wanted them to vote. Well, in that case, the turnout impact may be 9.9%, but the net vote impact will be 0, because you'll have the same number encouraged to vote the way you wanted it, and then the same, the equal to the number that were encouraged to vote for the opposition. Finally, you have sort of the intermediate case I have here. Suppose 75% voted the way that you wanted people to vote, and 25% of the ones who were urged to vote by your campaign ended up voting for the opposite side. In that case, essentially 75 minus 25% is the net vote impact, or 50%. So that will only be roughly half of what's be the reported turnout impact. So clearly there can be substantial differences between the turnout impact, which virtually all these various campaign efforts can report if they've actually structured the intervention so that they can measure it, whereas the net vote impact will be reported much less frequently. And the difference depends, as these examples show, on targeting. If you manage in your campaign to be targeting constituencies that will in fact turn out to vote in the direction that you would like them to vote, then you'll tend to have more of a net vote impact as well as a turnout impact. So targeting is really very critical. A couple basic research methods notes here. First of all, how do you define turnout impact? Well, we're talking about the percentage of people who were reached by a campaign and then voted, minus the percentage of those persons who would have voted if there had been no campaign. So we're talking about the difference between two groups. However, we can't necessarily observe these groups precisely. The impact, as I say here, is not directly observed. We have to estimate it. And the way we estimate it is by constructing control and comparison groups, where we use statistical techniques to compare the percentage voting for a campaign, for a particular campaign outcome, versus the percentage voting who were involved in the campaign versus the percent in the control group. So it's simple subtraction, but the problem is setting it up in such a way that we can measure it, and also can we actually attribute whatever difference we observe and we measure to the campaign itself. That's the other hard part of this. So we need to look at not just whether or not a campaign mailing was sent. We have to have some other strategies for making the folks who get the mailing from the campaign equivalent in other ways to the folks who don't get the mailing, the control group. So that's where random selection comes in. That if we have a random selection of voters who do and don't get sent the letter, the card, whatever our campaign is sending out, and then we hold out a control group that is equivalent in as many respects as we can possibly make it, then that helps us attribute any outcome that's actually observed to the campaign itself, rather than to just random noise. Unfortunately, these two groups will often not be exactly the same, and then we have to worry about whether we need to make other sorts of adjustments, and that's where some further statistical kinds of analyses come in. There's a little picture here. This is from the Swing Blue Alliance, their randomized control analysis, where they're showing we've got the target population, that is the folks who are included in the campaign, some of whom will get letters and some of whom won't, and then we divide them into the treatment group who gets the letters and the control group who does not. Then we observe in each case what their outcomes are, in this case whether or not they actually voted, apply some kinds of additional statistical adjustments if the two groups are not almost exactly equivalent, and then we end up with that's how we get our treatment impact measured. Okay, so that's the basic strategy. Let me add as an aside, there are many campaigns that don't actually go through this sort of exercise. They just basically come up with a list of volunteers and then go out and send out mailing to them. And they may, in fact, some of them may, in fact, be quite impactful. We just don't know. If you don't set up some sort of mechanism for measuring the campaign impact, you really can't tell whether the campaign itself is making a difference. Again, suppose we go through what was suggested in that Swing Blue slide here, and we do measure a turnout impact, but we don't directly observe the net vote impact. What can we say about whether there is a vote impact, a net vote impact? And that gets back to this issue of who was targeted. Were they people targeted who were in fact quite likely to vote in the direction that you were hoping they would vote, versus people who were just voting for essentially a coin flip? So we can look at information about the target population. For example, political party affiliation, past or current voting patterns, other sorts of information about the target group to tell us more about whether the group is more or less likely to vote the way we would like them to. Some organizations, for example, will target specific demographic groups, such as, say, women of a particular age who they suspect might have a strong interest in the questions about reproductive health availability and restrictions on various reproductive health procedures. So they simply use basic demographics there to help find a population that they think will be most responsive, and then they send their letters to those folks. Now, the problem, of course, is that we can't directly know which choice an individual voter makes. We do know from public information that someone has or has not voted. And the way we know that is the state departments of elections in many, many states actually have this as public information, where you can get, a big data file on all these people who are registered voters and whether or not they voted. And you can also find out, did they vote by mail, did they vote in person, but we cannot find out who they voted for or which side of the choice, if it's, say, a referendum, they chose. So we have available data, publicly available data. Sometimes they charge for it, but it's publicly available data on whether or not people voted, down to the individual level. There are public data on election outcomes, but we do not have that for individuals. We only have that at best for small groups. That is the smallest voting district, like a precinct, for example. And then, of course, we also have it for larger aggregates. Besides precincts, we have it for the counties that the precincts are in, and we have it for the states that the counties are in, and obviously for the whole country. But we cannot get those same data on election outcome for an individual down to that personal level. So when we talk about net vote impact, which of course is the best kind of measure of outcome for or effectiveness, at least for impact for a campaign, we can't again directly observe it in the most cases. So we have to estimate it. We still need our control and comparison groups and looking at the differences between them. But now they might be, for example, people who are surveyed by a follow-up survey, something like that, or there might be aggregate numbers for people in a precinct, some geographical area. So we still have to make some statistical adjustments to come up with some reasons for believing that the campaign mattered and that it impacted these whatever differences we observe. But we need to do it now with a different subset than all the voters who are out there that we could conceivably want to contact who are in the public records. One other really important factor: a campaign might have a substantial net vote impact, but at the same time, it might make very little difference. If you have a substantial net vote impact for, say, Party X in an election, but in fact Party Y is expected to win that election by 90%, then even your big net vote impact for Party X isn't going to change the outcome at all, will not contribute to the outcome at all. So we can differentiate between the notion of a campaign having an impact and a campaign having an effect in terms of affecting the outcome. And we'll see some examples here that's data that do get to looking at outcome and effectiveness, I mean. Now, by the way, this organization is one of the two that we did work with in 2022, Working America, does target close elections. They target swing states, and then they do measure net vote impact, and I'll say a little bit more about how they do that in a minute. But you can see here that they're comparing the WA vote gain. That's the vote gain of the Working America campaign in this is now the Georgia general election Senate, and then the Georgia Senate runoff. And you can see that in the first case, the general election, there was a very large impact that they estimate relative to the actual margin of victory, whereas in the second case, it was not negligible impact, but the vote gain was only about maybe a third or a little less than a third of the overall margin of victory. Still pretty important, but not quite as overwhelming as it was in the first case. We also did some work with letters to Pennsylvania for Working America, and in that case, here again you can see this is now the Senate, the U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania, and the vote gained, the net vote impact, which is what that WA vote gain stands for. Their estimated net vote impact was about half, a little more than half of the margin of victory. So there again, you would look at those numbers and presume that there was an important difference made by this campaign. Now, how does Working America, for example, come up with these net vote impact estimates? Well, they happen to have a ongoing membership program with a couple million members across the country now. Actually, that's probably closer to 20 million, I think. And they survey them on all sorts of things over time. And of course, they can also survey them after elections on who'd you vote for. So they use that survey process to actually find out who people voted for, and then can use that to do their estimates of the net vote impact. They also then try to validate some of those analyses, looking at precinct level outcome data. By the way, the precinct level outcome data is publicly available. It's sometimes a little hard to amass it and use it, but it's publicly available. So that's not difficult to come by. Now, one really important thing to note about Working America in particular is that while we wrote letters to Working America, that was really only one piece of what they were doing in that campaign. And this is, again, an important way of differentiating different kinds of election-related efforts. In some efforts, in some campaigns, there's just a one-shot. We send out one letter, one postcard, that's it. There's no further follow-up. There's no ongoing communications with the folks who we're targeting. Whereas in other cases, there is a multifaceted strategy that includes ongoing communications, sending out multiple communications of different types in order to reach the target population. So our letters were just one that we did for Working America in 2022 were really just one piece of that overall strategy. You can see they did doorstep canvassing to large numbers of voters. They sent out text messages to large numbers of voters, digital ads in local media and social media, the thousands of personal letters. That was what we helped with, and then of course the overall strategy essentially amounts to recruiting members, educating members, persuading them about which campaigns or platforms or outcomes were in their interest, given the nature of what they were concerned about, and then finally getting people out to vote. So it was a fairly complicated, sort of chain of events. Strictly speaking, the letter part of the campaign that we were directly involved in did the most in terms of recruiting members. That was really what was one of the major focuses of the letter campaign. But notice that we're talking here about a campaign that included both persuasion and also participation, encouragement in terms of get out the vote at the last minute, as the election date drew near. There are some people who argue that persuasion really is not possible, that's not effective. And I think for individual campaigns that just send out one piece of mail and that's it, that's probably true. If you send out a piece of mail to a bunch of people that you've gotten off a voter list, saying we want you to vote for candidate X and this is why we want you to do it, that by and large is not going to be very effective. On the other hand, if you have a multiple faceted campaign where you start out just by contacting people, getting them involved in ongoing information exchanges, that gives you an opportunity to do some persuasion, and then really getting them out to cast the vote is kind of the last step in the process. So campaigns that you'll get emails about, that you'll read about, that you'll get mailers about, differ widely in terms of the extent to which they are part of a integrated process like this that includes persuasion as well as the participation, versus campaigns that just send out a single mailing and typically will be focusing just on participation. Okay. In the case of Working America, by the way, there were some other interesting aspects to it. Their focus is non-college educated voters. That's one of the ways that they select their targets. And it turns out that the non-college voters that they select, and they're really looking for what they would call working class people. The targets, it turns out, in Pennsylvania were primarily white, and the targets in the Georgia elections were probably non-white, and specifically African American. So there could be some demographic differences, but in all these cases they were focusing on non-college educated people who they had reason to believe were low information voters. Often these would be people who were not getting news from cable news or any regular news sources, and were not really involved in any day-to-day way in thinking about politics. Now, for those voters, the letters we sent out were not about candidates at all. We never mentioned candidates. We were instructed not to mention candidates, not to mention elections, but rather to get them to share concerns we expressed about particular important issues. Then at the end of these letters, the text, the required text, got them to, if they were interested, to connect with Working America to get some more information. Again, the persuasion was not really the initial part of it. It was more information and connection to begin with. And as a result, the campaigns in Pennsylvania and Virginia, Pennsylvania and Georgia generated more than 70,000 voters in both cases. Yeah, Joyce. Oh, time out. Should you wait for a microphone? I think Nancy assumed there weren't going to be any questions.
No, hold on.
Well,
I'm curious to know how many people.
yeah.
I'm curious to know how many people responded wondering about candidates. Was there a phone number, or did they write to ask about specific candidates, since you weren't naming candidates?
Well, the letters included a mobile phone number, a text number, and basically concluded with a sentence like, "If you would like to know more about, where you can get information on COVID vaccination, say, or whatever the theme was of the letter, text this number." And that's then where the text went back to Working America, and then that's where they moved into the phases of follow-up, could be even personal door-to-door conversations as they followed up. But that was the latter stages in the process. Yeah, yeah. So we were just a cog in a big wheel, Yeah. Okay. Now, if we look at Swing Blue Alliance, this one is a little different. This was actually it was in collaboration with, or in cooperation with, the Democratic Party's 4 counties in eastern Pennsylvania, and the focus was to encourage people to vote by getting them to vote by mail. And those of you who helped out may remember we had this letter which we had to send out, and the letter also included a pre-printed letter from it might have been a party official, or it might have been from, I think it was a party official, and an address, an envelope that was already addressed to whatever the state office was where you were supposed to apply for a vote by mail ballot. So there was a letter included with some other material that had to be stuffed in, and then if they were interested, they had to follow up on. These letters, by the way, were targeted at not the same way that Working America targeted their letters. They were targeted at people who were either registered Democrats or for whom, based on their prior voting records, it looked like they might be reasonably expected to vote for Democrats if they got the letters and actually did something about them. So that was how it was targeted. And in total, all these campaigns that Swing Blue, all these counties that Swing Blue Alliance was working with, sent out 122,000, almost 123,000 letters to these targeted voters in these 4 counties. And we said, of course, we didn't. Volunteers here at Newbridge didn't account for, probably more than about 1% of that, something like that, roughly. And this was the campaign results. And there's some interesting things about it. Though I guess the most important thing to notice is that in terms of turnout, basically there were no positively significant impacts. Okay. Whoops. Try it again. Also notice that the total group sizes were for all 4 of these counties were pretty large. These analyses, by the way, are done separately by county. Okay. And the only place where they saw some evidence about positive impacts was in terms of getting people to vote by mail or vote early. Actually, vote early is also included in here. rather than wait till election day and vote at election day. So it was somewhat disappointing. A bit of good news, but disappointing nevertheless in terms of hoping to impact on the outcome. Of course, the ultimate outcome statewide was such that nobody felt too bad about it. But the bit of good news as far as the folks involved in the Democratic Party and other efforts that were doing downstream electoral activities is that if you get more people to vote early, that makes it a little bit easier on some of these other organizations that are doing what are sometimes called ballot chase, where they go after people who haven't voted yet. That it makes it a little bit easier for them to actually reach more people. Now, for whatever reason, that wasn't observed in the population that we had in these campaigns. But at least one might hope that if there were a larger fraction of the total voting population that were included in this sort of a campaign, that might be something significant. The other point that could also come into play is that it's typical in a lot of these campaigns that there will be a last-minute rush of information on TV and media and mailings, etc., toward the very end that are targeted at the late voters, the people who haven't voted by mail, and it makes it a little easier for whichever side that you're on to mount that kind of effort or counteract the effort of the opposite side on the election if the number of people you have to reach is smaller. And so basically that was a small practical consequence of this activity. Now, when I look at these campaigns versus Working America, and that is the Swing Blue Alliance campaigns in 2022 versus Working America, I guess two things that come to mind to me are that, first of all, the Swing Blue campaigns were not a structured sequence of interventions and communications. It was rather more sort of one shot, although I think in some cases they may have tried to follow up later on to get people who didn't respond. But basically it was a one-shot sort of effort, and clearly I think a sequential approach works better with more than just one effort at contacting a voter. And the other was that in the Pennsylvania activities, we were just focused on activation, that is getting people who we thought were going to vote for the outcome that we wanted to actually go out and do it. That persuasion, if you can do it effectively, and it's not easy to do, and it takes more resources certainly, is more likely to have some measurable impact, I think, than simple one-shot activation efforts. Okay, what's happening now in the near future? Well, I'm sorry, was a question? No. Okay. One item of particular interest for Swing Blue and for Working America is an upcoming election in a referendum in Ohio, where the state legislature wants to increase the percentage required for a referendum, a subsequent referendum to pass. They want to increase that percentage to 60%, which is essentially just making it a little bit harder for the general majority of the population to express and enact a particular policy, even though it might not agree with the policy of a majority of, say, the members of the state legislature. And this is, of course, a much bigger issue because of gerrymandering and the question of legislative districts being gerrymandered so that the makeup of a legislative body doesn't really reflect the overall makeup of the population of the state. So both Swing Blue and Working America are just starting to do some of these efforts, and I can provide more information to anybody who wants to get involved in these if you do. Basically, in both these cases, again, the role for volunteers that I'm aware of is essentially doing, a small amount of handwriting or addressing and that sort of thing. And clearly, in the case of Working America, we know that's just a one little piece of the overall, the overall effort. The Swing Blue Alliance also has some other efforts connected to this, because this isn't just now a party or a partisan kind of activity. It's there's some reproductive rights groups in Ohio that are very interested in this because of the concerns about the prospects for policies with respect to abortion and that sort of thing. And then here's just some examples of the kinds of things that are going out. This is Swing Blue Alliance sending out postcards, and I think all the people have to do with this is just handwrite the address on the postcard. And again, these are now being targeted in Ohio at voters who don't have a high probability of voting, but are predicted to have a strong interest in reproductive health rights. And that's sort of how they're targeting them. Swing Blue is also doing some stuff coming up in Virginia legislative districts, and they've targeted 3 rural districts that they're partnering with a rural organization, not a partisan organization, but a rural political organization to try to impact the elections in these 4 Senate or House legislative districts. Virginia is very interesting because right now the split in the legislature is virtually 50-50. If I remember correctly, the majority margin was numeral 1, as a 1 vote, and at least one of those elections was actually decided by a coin flip. So this is clearly if there ever was a swing state, this is definitely it. And this is the kind of stuff that they're sending out in there, again, on the postcards, in this case to the rural Senate or legislative districts. Now, what happened to 2024? It's a little early, I think, to see anything happening there. I'm not aware that much specifically is going on yet. My guess is that there will be lots of this stuff, lots of these mail campaigns, but that I think there's also been a tendency to move beyond that in some respects, so that there's more emphasis on also using electronic messaging, texting in particular, not so much email, but text messaging, and also relationship networks. So getting people involved who have some presumed connection with other people that they're trying to contact to encourage to come out and get involved in the electoral process. So it's a little hard to know, but I think it's certainly going to be a very active year, and I think it will have some other kinds of opportunities. Hopefully some of those could be opportunities, that is other kinds of opportunities besides just letter writing or postcard writing. And hopefully some of those might be opportunities that some of us at Newbridge might be able and comfortable to be involved in. But we will see. Nancy, a question.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
My
What
pleasure.
about phone banking? Because I found that to be extraordinarily effective. The relationship, I know, is huge. Just think how many of us, when we first move here and don't know our Dedham legislators, we know who to call to find out about who we should be voting for. So I'm interested in your response about both of those, and then I have one more question unless others have
Yeah,
questions.
I guess I would say phone banking has a sort of a mixed reputation, and it relates a lot to how much preparation goes into it. I think when you're involved in an effort where you're sort of cold calling, it's really not very pleasant. And of course, the yield in terms of how many people you actually reach is getting lower and lower because more and more of us are getting smart at avoiding, robocalls and this kind of stuff. So there is more and more use of phone banking. I will also add that there's more use of not just phone banking to encourage people to vote, but also phone banking in terms of what they call deep canvassing, talking about people's interests and using that as part of a sequence of interventions that again try to get people involved using persuasive information as well as the contacts. Bonnie, you had one other. I know Mary has a question here, and I'll be in big trouble if I don't have her question. Pardon? Oh, Nancy has the microphone. Right, okay. I'm sorry, thank you for the correction. Right. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, Meyer. Yeah.
So, based on the contacts that I keep getting digitally,
Right.
and once in a while on the phone, but not much, it seems to me that the Democrats are basically just trying to collect money now in preparation for 2024, because, that's all it seems to be.
Yeah, I have not looked very closely at fundraising efforts via email, and I'm sure we all get lots of these, personally, I'm not very interested in them. Although that's not the subject of today's talk, but I guess my view has become that there are organizations out there that tell you a lot about good places to support financially. And usually they're not specific political campaigns or parties, but organizations that are involved in the process. Like, for example, there was something called the States Project that was not partisan, but that was involved in working with candidates for state legislatures, and that had some reasonable basis for effectiveness. As far as I was informed, not from them, but from other organizations. The other thing I guess I should mention is that there are some organizations out there who basically define as their function to help us decide where to give our money. So these folks look very closely at how effective various organizations are, and then you may hear from them. I know one obvious example that I know about is an outfit called the Focus for Democracy, which actually is how I initially heard about Working America 5 years ago. Never heard of them, and watched I guess someone had me connect on a Zoom thing and watch the presentation of this organization, which, as I say, is in the business of fundraising for other people based on their own research in terms of whether this organization is a good one to donate to. Will it in fact achieve the ends you're looking for? So it's a little bit like the idea of Charity Navigator and some of these places with generally nonprofit donations. Who do you give to? Do you just give to anybody who asks you for money, or do you try to find out more about it? Yeah. Bruce, yeah.
Very quickly.
I'm sorry, Bonnie, yes.
Just to say, with the phone banking, many people don't answer, but you can leave messages, and you can figure out very concise, interesting messages, and I really and truly think they do have a difference, do make a difference. The one thing I'd love to ask you a little bit about, you talked about folks who might be interested in reproductive rights and using an issue.
Right.
several of us on Team Climate did a lot of environmental voters.
Right.
Where we got lists of people who we knew really cared about the environment but did not show up at
Yeah.
the polls and
Right.
didn't vote.
Right.
Do you think something like that is effective?
I don't know unless I look at the actual results. So there's an organization called the Environmental Voter Project that does a lot of this stuff, and I've seen a lot of their output, and I guess I would say they do at least try to do some randomization and this kind of thing, which is good because lots of places don't do that. What I've seen is, I guess I'd like to see them provide a lot more information about what they did, how they did it, were the control groups and the comparison groups really the same, various things like that, how the targeting and that sort of thing, because the targeting turns out to be a bit of a challenge with, in the case of environmental concerns, for example, we don't have public data on whether people are. Well, yeah, that, although that's a pretty small group of the we'd hope it'd be more, but yeah. Yes, but again, it's, the targeting makes a big difference. Targeting makes a big difference, and how well you can target makes a big difference. But, yes, it was someone else. Bruce, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for this I've been interested for years in actual data about effectiveness, but I'd like you to look at it a different way. Do you have any idea what the percentage in the high visibility national campaigns of funds are devoted to these kinds of things, personal and phone and letter
Yeah.
efforts versus television campaigns? What the fund breakdown is?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, if you're talking about the percentages of funds, I think clearly the huge majority of funds are coming through, 501c4 PACs and people like that, and not in terms of fundraising, not these organizations, but the PACs may then turn around and support some of these efforts. You just don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Was if you're looking at the issue of effectiveness,
Right.
or the belief of the political operatives who run these campaigns,
Right.
the percentage of funds that are spent on television
Right.
on television advertising versus these kinds of efforts.
Well, campaigns like this don't spend much on television. Yeah. Pardon? The what? Oh, no, well, you're talking about the candidates, or you're talking about these kinds of organizations? Oh, well, as I say, in aggregate, with the candidates, with the PACs, there's a lot of money spent on television ads, for sure. These organizations don't spend any money on television. And a number of organizations that I can think of that are involved in this kind of, these kinds of efforts don't spend a lot of money on television, or any money on television. Because again, the problem is targeting. If you're going to do this sort of stuff, you have to have a good sense of who you're targeting and how to reach those folks, and whether or not they're likely, in fact, to make decisions that you're trying to encourage. And I think television ad is not a very good way to do that. Social media is, I think, is in fact something that's starting to be more commonly used, but television ads, not much. It's a pretty blunt instrument.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap it up?
Oh,
No?
thank you.
All right. Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.